Welcome everybody to a very special episode. We're already laughing of Legends and Lectures. I'm with my friend and the legendary
The
Elminster
legendary.
himself, Ed Greenwood. Yeah.
Hi! Hi, Michelle. I am Ed Greenwood. Yes, yes.
Ed, would
I,
you, for those who don't know you, and I think this is, I think if you really, if you don't know, I mean, I don't know if anybody, for those who are just listening, I have on my desk, I've got a mimic, I've got my D20 here, I've got the vessel. Which Mark lovingly painted, which watches all things in all corners, and I've got our little beholder here. So, not a beholder. I've
Mind Flayer.
yes, the mind flayer. My God, I can hear all the nerds going in the comments. I said beholder because actually one of my students recently asked me about that because they asked if beholder was trademarked or not, and so and I
It darn
yeah,
is.
it
It's, yep,
is yeah.
yep.
And so I said, I don't think you can use that. So you're gonna might
No,
have to call it
you
something
can't.
else. Yeah. And so Ed, since we're already talking about D&D, would you like to tell people what you have done in the past and who you are?
Okay. I am a mild-mannered Canadian librarian.
It's true.
I am 66 years old, so I'm older than dirt. And I started writing for Dragon magazine. First article was published in Dragons 30, and I slipped mentions of the Forgotten Realms, my home world, into Dragon articles until um, TSR was getting rid of Greyhawk because they had pushed Gary out and wanted a unified game world for the second edition of the game, according to Jeff Grubb's white paper. And the superiors approved Jeff Grubb's idea and rewarded him with, okay, find the world then. So he cold called me at the public library north of Toronto in North York, where I worked, and they bought the realms. So I created the Forgotten Realms, which became and still is the official setting for the Dungeons and Dragons game. And I've written about 550 or co-written or whatever you want to, game books, and out of that, about 87 or solo novels under my own name. And then there were about another 30 or 40, rewritten Harlequins and rescues and ghost written stuff. So, and I continue to work in libraries. So I, let's see, what else have I done? Judge for the Sunburst Awards, judge for the World Fantasy Awards, radio voice work, computer game voice work. I'm probably the only Canadian to have appeared as himself in comic books from three different companies. I also script comics, etc., and generally do lots of creative stuff. So that's me.
In a very small nutshell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, pack your days. We have no guarantees we get a second life or any other life than this one. So if you want to do it now.
And you, as you said to me before, you're busier than ever. And we'll get to some of the things that you're doing now. But I wanted to ask you first. So, I mean, I know that you've been writing the realms, I think since you said since you were 8 years old or 7 years old, something like that,
Six,
around.
six. A decade before D&D. I was six.
So
Um,
what do you remember? What was the first thing that you invented?
well, I was sitting in, was it kindergarten? Probably. Bored out of my tree. Um, oh, I remember. It was kindergarten. The the teacher wanted us to have naps twice during the day.
Hmm.
And she had these stupid little mats that you were supposed to lie down on. And I
Hmm.
say stupid little mats because they were carpet samples. In those days, when you went to buy a carpet, you didn't get a little thing the size of a mouse pad to be your carpet sample. You got a thing you could lie a person down on. It was like a short single bed. That's how big your carpet sample was because you were supposed to go home, put it on the floor, and it would sort of fill a room, not to the edges, but you could look at your furniture and look at the carpets. I was like, yeah, okay. So we had all of those, one for each of us to lie down on. They did not pad the floor at all, but she turned the lights out. We were supposed to lie on our backs and nap. And then she would walk around to make sure we weren't whispering to the person next to us, making farting noises because, giggling, um, all the things that young, energetic kindergarten kids do. So I always closed my eyes and laid still because I didn't want to get in trouble with the teacher, and I would always daydream. And I had a day vision of picture postcard winter snow falling silently in a beautiful deep forest at night. And the moon is shining down on this little clearing, and it's all beautiful, unbroken snow. And there's a lady with silver hair, and my silver as in the metal, not as in old lady silver hair, as in she has hair that is like metallic silver, but it's long, straight, unbound hair. And she's kneeling on the ground or sitting on the ground with her cloak around her because it's cold winter, and she's harping on a little Celtic harp, a hand harp. And she's harping beside a tiny little fire that she has made. And her harping is drawing the attention of all sorts of critters because this is a deep woods. So pairs of eyes are blinking at her out of the dark trees all around the clearing. And then out of the trees came a similar lady, short hair, but also metallic silver, in full plate armor with a similar cloak around her shoulders, obviously attracted by the harping, and comes forward into the clearing. These two ladies looked very similar, as in sisters or related. They were, in fact, of course, Storm Silverhand and Dove Falconhand, or later Falconhand, of the Seven Sisters. But I didn't know that then. I just knew there were these two ladies. They'd met in the deep woods. One of them was harping and they had silver hair. I wanted to know more about them. So I started creating the Forgotten Realms from that thing. I was age 5, but there wasn't much more to the realms for about a year other than little bits and pieces built around characters. And then I started telling stories of Mert the Moneylender, who is basically, okay, he's basically Falstaff, Sir John Falstaff from Shakespeare, but a
Hmm.
little bit of Nicholas Van Ryn from Poul Anderson's Pulsotechnic League, and a little bit of Guy Gilpatrick's Glencannon, the drunken Scottish engineer from the men's magazines of the day. You put the three of them together. He's an absolute scoundrel, and he's wheezing and he's old. And each story was set in a port city on what I later on figured out was the Sword Coast. And I later on figured this was the Forgotten Realms. But I mean, he was just going south from city to city because each story would end with him leaving town one floppy sea booted stride ahead of the authorities, the enemies he'd come into the story with, and the new enemies he'd made during the story. And I was basically doing the same thing I was reading in my father's Fantastic Adventures magazine, which were Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories, in
Hmm.
which they're self-contained stories, episodes in the lives of the Mutt and Jeff partnership that is Fafhrd and the Mouser. But if you read a bunch of them, you realize you're being shown little slices of the same setting in the background. So I was doing the same thing. And Mert gradually hopscotched his way, story by story, south to Waterdeep, which was big enough to hide in, so he stayed there.
So was that the first time you encountered fantasy? Was the Fritz Leifer books, or was there
Nope, no.
something
Oh
earlier?
no. My father had a den, which all of us kids learned to play the piano in or took our piano lessons. I think that's a better distinction. We took our piano lessons. I was the runt of the litter. I was the oldest kid, but I was the only one in the family who didn't have perfect pitch. Um, so I know I wasn't much interested in piano and all the rest of it. But my father had records down there, all the records of the day, Tom Lehrer, stuff like that, and all of his books. And he built his own bookshelves, and like all book collectors, you build your bookshelves to fit the books by height so you can cram the maximum number of books in. And I could read everything in my father's study. Now, which meant that I got to read salacious books like Woman in Love and Forever Amber and Peyton Place. But also all of his fantasy and science fiction books, all falling apart World War. two paperbacks, give one to a friend in uniform, of all the locked room mysteries of the day, John Dixon Carr, footprints on the ceiling, all that stuff. Um, so I've read everything, and I that's how I first came to fantasy and science fiction, reading stuff in my dad's study.
So we nerds like to have a debate about this, but what, in your estimation, makes something a fantasy?
When you know something in the story isn't true in your real life.
That's interesting that you give that definition because when we nerds debate over what is the first fantasy book or fantasy title, that is really one of the great definitions. Is it's a completely different reality or something that you know to be false. So, for example, a ghost story may or may not be considered fantasy because if it's a story about a ghost who you believe is real, or it's like your Aunt Ida, that's not a fantasy. Maybe
Yeah,
that would be, yeah. So, but if it's you being visited by a ghost from another world or another dimension, maybe that would instead be considered fantasy.
yeah, that's it. If you're reading Gilgamesh, okay, if at the time it was retold to the people, they thought they were hearing the truth from the priests, then it's not fantasy.
Yeah, I was going to ask about mythology. So,
Yeah.
depending on obviously depending on how you look at mythology and which mythology. So there are some people who claim, oh, that the mythology would be the first fantasy, including Gilgamesh and all that, and others say, oh, maybe it's something like Beowulf or the sagas because we don't know how much of that is real. We don't know how much of that
Well,
actually ha
if you're a French troubadour and you are deliberately adding Lancelot
yeah.
to the Arthurian mythos, inventing him and adding him so that the French have a gallant hero in the mythos, then you're deliberately creating fantasy. You know it's not real and you're adding it to the story. Now, there's the difference between embellishing the story when you're retelling it as a minstrel or a bard or a traveler in a tavern trying to earn the price of a free drink by just exaggerating the story a little bit. Every storyteller makes things better, makes the tale better told. But there's the exaggerating for effect when you've got an audience around the fire and deliberately embellishing in ways that are you're adding stuff to the story and you're playing to it. For instance, a folk musician performing live who knows that they're performing in Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver and they add a local allusion to the song by changing the lyrics. You are deliberately and if you're doing that in a fantasy story, you are deliberately writing fantasy at that moment. Even if you're taking um, any of the old Brothers Grimm and you thought it was once um, a little Red Riding Hood and a big bad wolf or a man who could change into a wolf and there were woodsmen who would rescue such little girls and even if you think it's gospel truth, the moment you start adding your own inventions to the story and you know they're inventions, and it doesn't matter what your motive is, if you're a Christian priest retelling the story and you're adding in good will triumph over evil and here's your Christian lessons I'm shoehorning into the story, you are deliberately writing fantasy at that moment because you know it's not real.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I don't think people of the day, especially with romances, ever thought it was real. Nowadays people look back on Arthurian myths and they think, oh, these were real people, or oh, Arthur had to be real. We go, no, they knew that it at the time that it wasn't real, and they were just inventing as they went
Mm-hmm.
along. That was the whole point. These, especially with the romances, these were tales that people told in court to entertain. They
Yes.
understood that they weren't real, and so that they kept inventing and adding on to it. There's a lot of, again, you mentioned some of the fairy tales, even Beauty and the Beast
Mm-hmm.
was something that was serialized and added on to. It was originally published anonymously in 1740, but and then obviously other things like Grimm, they took folk tales that were going around in their
Mm-hmm.
area
Sure.
and they just collected them and then embellished them. So they knew even though my boy Jacob Grimm made up a lot of crap about what he thought was true and what wasn't true.
Mm,
He knew that at least part of his stories were not true, but he tried to connect that he did the same thing where he tried to connect them to something real, and he just ended up screwing up a lot of things.
yeah.
There are a lot
And
of
I mean,
people.
yeah, there are noble reasons for doing that. I mean, if you watch the movie Excalibur, you can tell that they are trying to weave a coherent tale out of all these bones of the Arthurian mythos and make it make sense as a narrative story that's going to play out in under 2 hours. You know, so you can they're doing it with the best motives in the world, but that doesn't matter. They are still writing fantasy at that point. And
So you say it goes all the way back.
sure, all the way back, it's the root literature of mankind. It's to put it in Marvel Comics terms, it's what if?
Yeah.
What if we could fly? What if we could bring that person back to life? We're all standing around the grave sobbing. What if they could have one more day alive? And then you can write the fantasy story where they go around saying, "You're an asshole, and you're an asshole, and I'm not paying you back, and you owe me this," or whatever it is, whatever you want to put in that story. That's what the fantasy is. Now, if you try and explain it with, quote, science, then it's science fiction.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, exactly. Or now we have, of course, there's science fantasy like Star Wars, where it's like, how does it work? We don't know, but space.
Yeah, well, there's the difference. If you and space opera in the middle as your, the western in the stars. But I have seen science fiction movies which are hilarious, where someone's saying, "Oh, that's the molecular twangulator," and the other person in the control console beside them says, "It's frickin' magic, dude."
It's true. I mean that is kind of what it is. There's a debate, as you know, well, obviously there's always debates. What is fantasy book? Because very famously, Ray Bradbury, he
Hmm.
said his books were fantasy. He didn't
Yes,
think they were science fiction. And so because he was very heavy into metaphor and he didn't really think even, his Martian tales,
yes,
he thought that was fantasy because, as you say, he didn't really add any hard science elements into them.
that's right.
Yeah,
And there are other people, I've met them, Hollywood executives, who will define science fiction as it has to have a robot or a spaceship or a time machine or all three. If it doesn't, it's not science fiction.
yeah, and as you say, again, those lines
Yeah.
get blurred all the time. So
And a famous science fiction writer, John Campbell, said science fiction is what I point at and call science fiction because he
well,
was an editor,
yeah.
and he said, I can't define it, but I know what it is when I see it. So when I point at it and say it's, science fiction.
So nowadays you have a lot of people because now romantasy is very big, and you have a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, that's not fantasy." You go, "Yeah, if it's got a werewolf in it. It's definitely fantasy."
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
just because it's not somebody else's idea of fantasy. And again, we can point to the romances, Guillaume de Palerme, where
Hmm.
you have a werewolf in there. That's definitely fantasy. Just because somebody does, it's not our modern idea of high fantasy. It definitely is in there. Or
Well,
some
no, but okay, I'll give you the opposing answer.
Go for it.
The lady is bearing her bosom to the vampire, who is the European count in the full opera suit with the fangs, but also the cape. And she turns and looks at you disapprovingly and saying, "I am yielding to a vampire. This is horror. Thank you very much."
Some would say that is true. Some would say that Carmilla or Dracula or any of the Gothic vampire things either would be fantasy or would be horror. But I think nowadays people wouldn't classify that necessarily as fantasy.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's how we've
yeah,
shifted. Yeah.
yeah.
And then the count looks at you and says, "Yes, I am the exfoliator." And then he starts nibbling. Yeah.
Or even children's books. I mean, we look at something like Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan, and even though that is definitely contemporary fantasy, there are
Hmm.
some people who say, nope, that's children's books. That's a whole other thing. That's not that doesn't factor into, I guess, Tolkien-esque style of
Most
fantasy.
of children's books are fantasy
Yeah.
because they give children more agency and power than they have in real life society, even if it's just to be believed by grown-ups in the story, But then again, yeah, then we get down to how do you define fantasy? And I'm defining it as if you know something isn't real and you put it in the story as a story element, it's fantasy.
I define fantasy as, what do you mean I'm an adult and I don't have to pay taxes? This is great.
Yes, all right, there you go. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Wow, that's a real fantasy.
That's
Oh
a
my
real
God.
fantasy.
What do you mean I'm an adult and everybody automatically loves you just because you've sung a song in a square? That's a real fantasy.
I am young and beautiful.
That's
See?
exactly. That's a real fan. Maybe there's a reason why, just like, the pink portrait of Dorian Gray. Maybe you have a portrait in your house of Elminster that is like more wrinkled than it just gets more wrinkled and your skin just gets smoother. That's
Sure.
like,
Well, okay. Or all the people who attended university and had to stay in rented digs,
uh-huh.
after they got pushed out of residence because they weren't first year students anymore, and they had to rent some horrible basement apartment. Um, I met some people who were living a fantasy because they had a horrible pink bathroom. It was salmon pink with green trim, all tiled, and they couldn't do a thing about it. One of those horrid bathrooms that has a light bulb in the shower that the water cascades down around, that
That's
sort of
not
stuff.
safe.
No, of course not. And they hated it, but they weren't allowed to change a thing because the landlord lived in the house upstairs. It was the landlord's house. They were forbidden to drill holes in the walls or do anything. So they had a lovely little sign on the door of the bathroom that said, "This is not a pink bathroom."
There is no spoon. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so there's the fantasy. This is not a pink bathroom. Okay.
You can
Anyway,
invent that'd be, you know what? I'd love to know why that light bulb was there. That's a great idea.
well, so you could see what you were washing. No, you could see where you were being electrocuted. There you go. Uh,
Certainly, I mean, that is technically a fantasy. It's certainly a far cry from The Hobbit. I mean, even though if you think about, yeah, sure, The Hobbit has werebears and talking spiders and and trolls and other characters in it. But even just this, the opening scene at Bag End, even though Bilbo is just sitting there eating his dinner, that's certainly a fantasy. It's a place that does not exist in our realm. And I
well,
think you define the Forgotten Realms as being able to be gotten to from Earth,
yes,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
The phrase Forgotten Realms meant okay, if you look at your monster manual, it has dinosaurs in it.
Hmm.
It has um humans, but it has giants and dragons and wyverns and all the weird stuff like the Beholder and the Mind Flayer. Tim Kask invented the Mind Flayer. Anyway, way back then. But you don't meet them on the street when you're going to the shops or when you were going to high school and had to walk to high school. You didn't meet these things on the streets. But we know all about them. All of Earth knows about what a vampire is, sort of thing. So why? Well, there still are gates linking all the worlds of the multiverse, but we've forgotten how to get from our Earth to the Forgotten Realms, which is why you don't see dragons every on rush hour every day holding up traffic because they're not. We don't know how to get there, and this is not a new notion. The very first novel, as we think of as modern novels, was put out by William Morris as opposed to serialized stuff. He actually, because he had Kelmscott Press, he actually started publishing novels, and um, one of his very early ones is called "The Wood Between the Worlds."
Hmm.
And C.S. Lewis liked it enough. He swiped the whole damn thing for Narnia um, because he was a fan of that book. And the whole point of The Wood Between the Worlds is it is a halfway place where all the worlds impinge on each other. So if you step between two trees at the right time, or when moonlight is full upon them, or whatever, your next step is in the wood, not in our real world. If you step across if you're walking in a waste ground somewhere in one of our modern American cities, and the track leads into a puddle, and there's a stone in the middle. Well, if you step on the stone in the right direction and keep going, you just splash through the pond and go on your way on the. But if you turn when you're on the stone and step that way, you either get very wet in the next step, or if it's the right time, you'll be in the woods. And when you're in the woods, an arrow could come hissing past your ear because one of Robin Hood's men is lost in the woods and has been for quite some time, and he's getting hungry, and you look like food. Whatever, all that stuff. You can meet with everybody in the wood between the worlds. So I just thought that is really cool. I'm going to do that because that allows me to put all the fantasy settings of all the books I love together in my Forgotten Realms. Because it's not yet D&D, it's not yet an official campaign. It's just a world for my imagination as a bored nerd in being babysat through public school and not wanting to be there. I
It's
mean,
it's interesting that you mentioned William Morris because he is, I think many people have kind of forgotten about him now, but William Morris, I think, is probably, in my estimation, uh, really the first writer of a high fantasy novel with the Well at the World's End.
yeah,
And people don't really think about it much now,
yeah,
but I think that is probably the first real fantasy novel, as
yeah,
in the genre as we
yeah,
define it today.
yeah.
Yeah.
We go from the romances, Amadis of Gaul, Pomeroy of England, which is a knight errant or a fool wandering away from home into a increasingly fantasy version of Europe. The very thing that Don Quixote was a parody of, because Cervantes had read enough of these and they were ridiculous, and he was going to send up the whole genre. So we moved from that to William Morris, and then the next one I think is Edison with the Worm Ouroboros and the Zimiamvian trilogy.
There's a
And
lot. I mean, we could point to a
yeah,
lot of them. Same thing with, I mean, some people say that Haggard, the King Solomon's Mines,
yeah.
might be fantasy, but I would rather say that more is now what we would say is adventure fiction.
Well, yeah, there's
But
an entire subgenre, Professor Challenger, The Lost World, or you go off to darkest Africa, or as my father used to call it, you go off to darkest edge of the map and beyond. And then whatever you find there is fantastical. And
yes.
again, this is nothing new. Pliny was doing it, all the rest of it.
Oh God, yeah, don't
Yeah, 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 yeah. But
Pliny or
again,
Plato, don't look Plato on this channel.
Plato, inventor of the plate. No,
Inventor of Atlantis. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Hey, the fishing is good there at this time of the year.
Especially when you fish up a siren, I'm very sure.
As my father used to say, what's the point in catching a mermaid?
It's true.
And I'd say, what do you mean, Dad? He said, shh, not in front of the ladies. And I'd go, where? And he'd guffaw. And all the women in my family would look daggers at me. And he'd say, you got that right, son. And none of them appreciated that. Anyway,
But it is true if you have something, let's say like Splash, where you do catch a mermaid, is that considered to be fantasy? Because technically it's our world, it's a real world, but there just happens to be a mermaid in it.
sure.
And yeah,
Disney
so
did a lot like that. Sometimes it was Blackbeard's ghost, but sometimes it was your dog can talk to you, but
yeah.
not when anyone else can hear them. So if
Exactly.
another adult or another human is standing too near, they can't talk. The moment you think you're alone, and of course they explored that. If somebody's eavesdropping and you don't know they're there, does the tree still make a sound? Can you still hear your dog? And in fact, Roger Zelazny, in his last novel that wasn't posthumous, A Night in the Lonesome October, it's told by a dog who can only talk in certain times, and the dog is owned by Jack the Ripper.
Of course, the only one.
Yeah, and we have all these, people gathering in a plot um, borrowed from early Lovecraft, so the Dunsany Lovecraft
Hmm.
of the Gates of Deeper Slumber and so on, and it's the Dream Quest of Undo and Kadath, which is, by the way, folks, all of you students out there, You want to read the first novel without any chapters? Just keeps going from end to end. Dream Quest of Unknown. Anyway, uh,
Oh, it's if well, if you want, you really want to read what people can be is considered to be the first novel with no chapters from end to end. Just read the Tale of Genji. But
well, yeah, okay,
it's really incomprehensible.
yeah.
Just go, all right. I guess like there's no plot. It's just and then and then. But it's amazing though that you've mentioned Lord Dunsany because again, I think he's one of those people that people just forget because he influenced so much in his
Mm,
time. He wrote was it The Gods of Pagiana
yeah.
and then The King of Elfland's Daughter, which was
Mm.
really really important. And
And
yeah.
he held the last tournament ever, as in guys putting on armor, getting lances, and going to kill each other, and it rained. People caught cold, armor rusted, the whole thing was a disaster. But he actually held it.
Well, I guess now we have fake ones in Ren fairs,
Yeah.
but yeah, I guess yeah, he really meant it.
Oh yeah. He was a soldier in Ireland as well as an Irish lord. Um, the title has survived. His son is going through, with assistance, all of his father's papers and putting out new Dunsany books, uncollected short stories, and so on. If you're in the market for a $600 book, letterpress book done by hand, gorgeous, there's a series of them that comes out from the
Oh
press.
God.
And if I was wealthy enough, I'd be buying each and every one of them.
I would love to have them. That and what was it the I think the original one of the original versions of The Hobbit that has a mistake in it. I think that was the stipulation for why this version of The Hobbit sold for. We talked about it recently on the RKO Scoop program. It sold for over $60,000 because it was a version that was first edition, but it had a mistake, and that printing only ever happened at a specific time. And so somebody happened to have that first edition with the mistake in it.
Mm,
And even though I think, it's interesting, we talked a little bit about children's books and how most children's books are fantasy. You look at The Hobbit, and many people nowadays don't consider that to be a children's book, probably because of its association with Lord of the Rings.
mm-hmm,
Whereas at the time, The Hobbit was considered to be
mm-hmm.
a children's. It was wildly successful, but it was still, The Hobbit was in 1937. But one that I love best, and I think people forget about, is The Sword and the Stone
Mm-hmm.
and T.H. White. I mean, obviously, things happened with Once and Future King. But
Yeah,
did you read Sword and the Stone when you were a kid, Ed?
yeah, all of them. The Old Maid Knight, all of them,
Oh,
as
The Old Maid
separate
Knight's the
books.
best.
Yeah, yeah, I've read them all as individual books, and yeah, my father had like everything. And The Wall of Serpents by DeCamp and Pratt, stuff in the original.
Wow.
Um, he also had oh, geez, the Robert Graves one. Anyway, um, the original hardcover.
Hmm.
You never knew what you were going to find down there. Um, I, because again, they were sorted by size. So, memorably, The Robe by Lloyd Douglas, the novel of the Christ, on one side, and The High White Forest by Ralph Allen, a novel of the Battle of the Bulge, which has um, Germans who are going to be sent behind the lines being taught the F bomb, and the Nazi officer comes to inspect the class. So the teacher is showing them off. So for 3 pages, they desperately try and pronounce FUCK like an American. Of course, when you're like a 6-year-old kid, you find that uproariously funny. And sandwiched between these two books were the original George Allen and Unwin hardcovers of The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, lucky
Yes.
man.
Yeah.
Lucky man.
Anyway.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
though those just like Once Future King, they were made into separate books because of the war,
Yeah.
and we didn't get a full edition, like a full
Mm-mm.
whole thing of Lord of the Rings until the 60s.
Yeah.
And so if you had the original separate books, oof, that's quite nice. Same thing. I have the original separate books of Once Future King, including
Mm-hmm.
the original version of The Witch in the Wood or The Queen of Air and Darkness.
Mm.
And they were quite easy and cheap to get because again, I think people just forgot about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the Lord of the Rings, no. So if you have those somewhere, tuck them in with you, sleep with them at night until.
I don't have them. No, no, I don't have them. But yeah, there are. It's amazing when books get forgotten, like The Face and the Frost by John Bellairs, or The Folk of the Air by Peter S. Beagle. It doesn't matter whether the book is brilliant or groundbreaking. It either becomes impossible to find because there are just no copies and they're not valued, or you can find it everywhere in secondhand stores because people don't know what they're missing.
Yeah, that's how I found Paul Creswick's Robin Hood. People always read the Howard Pyle one,
Right.
and Paul Creswick's is really the best one. And he did a bunch of fantasy slash adventure stories, and he's one
Hmm.
of those authors who really skirted the line. He was very popular in his day, but he really skirted the line between folklore, fantasy, and history. And he wrote Saga of the Dane and a bunch of other
Hmm.
things. And I found his books no problem, but a lot
Yep.
of but because nobody knows who he is anymore.
Yeah. And there's a great version of Arthur called King of the Lordless Country by Roy Turner. And its cover looked like a cartoon because somebody hand drew it.
Ugh.
And so it was um, considered valueless by many libraries, and they just withdrew it and tossed it or put it on the 25-cent pile. And it is one of the best Arthur books you'll ever read. It's all told by Bedwyr the Furious, Bedivere, but Bedwyr. And it is brutal and feels realistic. And it's like, but it's one of those forgotten treasures. They're everywhere. Yeah, and it's frightening to see how quickly people I knew throughout their entire careers, like Robin McKinley, Patricia McKillip, Julian May.
I
How,
have the Beasts of Eld on my shelf. I know who
yeah,
McCaleb is.
there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah. And yeah, I actually, luckily, before she died, got to share an elevator ride at Astra with her and tell her, thank you for all the good reads. And she was a little bewildered because she wasn't used to fandom. And she was a little of the, thank you, go away. I'm trapped in this little steel cage with you. You know, but no, by the end of it, um, she was smiling and waving as I bought her dinner, because she just didn't make friends easily and she was shy and this convention was full of people dressed as furries and she was, anyway, but no, all of that stuff. I recommend you read the Riddle Master trilogy. I recommend you read The Blue Sword and The Hero and the Crown. Um, and Julian May's wonderful Galactic Milieu books. Yeah, there's all that stuff there. And read Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and Grey Mouser.
hmm
Um, some of it doesn't date well. Doesn't matter. This is the root literature. We don't we don't cancel and cast aside Conan or Tarzan or King Arthur or Robin Hood because they're dated. We just say, "Oh, I know a better version," but you still consume it. Anyway.
Well, for his day, Robert E. Howard, Robert E. Howard was very progressive, and
Hmm.
I mean, if you look at a lot of his other historic, besides his Hyborian Age stuff, which is always great. I mean, The God and the
Hmm.
Bowl is definitely one of my favorite stories of all time. But if you look at a lot of his historical fiction, like The Sword Woman, which is where
Hmm.
Sonia originally came from,
Yep. Hmm.
it was very progressive, and he had a lot of female heroes. The original
Yep.
Red Sonja was a Ukrainian warrior who didn't want to get married, and so she killed her husband and ran away.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Ta-da!
good.
Which is what you do. No, oops.
It's pretty good in them
Well,
days. But so I think a lot of people don't look at Conan and think, oh, he must be a chauvinist pig. But then if you look at the other writing that Robert E. Howard did that's less popular, a lot of it was very forward thinking. And
yeah.
he had a girl, it's because he had a girlfriend who had red hair and he really liked her. And even
Yeah.
though things didn't work out between them, he often wrote her into his stories. Because all of his heroes are like fiery red hair. And you okay.
Yep.
I, you
And
see
the
what
the other thing, if you think Conan is, the grim doer, noble savage, and read his A Gent from Bear Creek and
hmm
the other Breckenridge Elkin. For those of you who are unfamiliar with them, you can find them on the Project Gutenbergs because they are out of copyright, and they're short stories, and they're set at the time of Davy Crockett in this mythical Wild West, and they're told by this friendly lummox who is much stronger than he thinks he is. And it's absolutely hilarious. He says things like, "Well, how was I to know when I flang him out the window that the
That's
sheriff was
great.
coming up the street and was right outside? And how was I to know that the sheriff did not tie his horse to the trough the way you should do, like any God fearing man would do, and would get it right in the teeth? And how was I to know that he'd be reloading his gun at that moment and it would go off? And how was I, and you read these things and you're just killing yourself laughing, and you think, this is the same guy who wrote Conan. I can't believe it. So yeah, he could do everything. And
I
for
have all of his, or even Solomon Kane.
Yeah.
He had a bunch of different things called Conqueror. It
Oh
was
yeah, King
he
Gull.
he wrote all of these things and he did everything. And it's amazing to think that, he was so young and died so young, but he just had an incredible imagination and he could do anything. He was all encompassing. And even though I think a lot of people credit him as being the grandfather of sword and sorcery, he did, as you say, he did everything else too. He did adventure, he did history. It didn't really matter to him. When he wrote Twilight of the Grey Gods, he originally wrote it as The Spears of Clontarf, which is one of my favorite short stories of all time. And I would argue that's the better one because
Hmm.
that one's all about Brian Boru and his last stand. And he based it on the ahistorical piece that Brian Boru's family wrote about Brian Boru. But it was very interesting to see that this is where his interest was. He
Hmm.
was really going back to a lot of historical fiction that had been forgotten at the time. And he just picked and chose and he did tons of different stories like this.
Hmm.
And Weird Tales never paid for it, but
Yeah, yeah. And Harold Lamb too, another forgotten writer
Mhm.
who was a titan in his day, like Frank Yerby, Harold Lamb, da da da. And if you want to read a perfect medieval-ish short story, purports to be medieval, read Doom Rides In
Oh
by
yeah.
Harold Lamb. Or read The Mighty Landslayer or The Curved Saber, the novel, or any of the adventures of the Cossack, the old wily Cossack, with the unfortunate name Clit. But it was, yeah, well, anyway.
Man, reading that, the imagination will go wild. I mean, could you imagine just one sitting on a horse going, yeehaw,
Yeah.
going off into the distance? Oh my gosh. That's fantastic. I love that. Now at least now we know that that's what inspired some of your fiction.
Hey, I read all of this stuff. A. Merritt, um, everything that Lynn Carter was finding and anthologizing at the Sign of the Unicorn's Head.
hmm
I was reading all of them. Edgar Rice Burroughs,
hmm
all of that stuff. Not just Tarzan, but all of the Mars books,
Mars.
the
Yeah,
Venus
exactly.
books, everything. Um, Pellucidar, you name it. I was there for it. I read them all because reading stuff was what I liked to do. Um,
So besides playing D&D, which we knew you did before Forgotten Realms became
got
part of,
published. Yeah,
yeah. Um, what was some of the first things that you wrote?
there is a novel out there called Fool's Master, which was okay. There is a subgenre of books. Um, the ones that might still be remembered. Bertrand Brinley, who's been dead for a while, wrote The Adventures of the Mad Scientist Club, and in the end, it had 5 sequels. The New Adventures of the Mad Scientist, the Big Kerplop, stuff like that, which are a bunch of bored kids in the American Midwest starting in the 1930s, but the stories sort of updated as went along. Um, and they were nerds and they invented things, and they had hijinks as a result. Like they haunted a house to scare the mayor and the police chief and the fire chief of their local town. Um, Phil Stong, who was a famous writer in his day, um, look him up. You probably won't find a mention of him, but he wrote a musical called State Fair that
hmm
was made into movies twice, one of which went up for an Oscar.
I've seen it.
And yeah, yeah, okay, that guy. And he's mainly remembered today for a kid's book called Thidwick, the Big-Hearted Moose. But he wrote a book called Way Down Cellar, which is about three teenage boys. One of them moves to this small town and they find a priest's hole and secret passage. And it's the hijinks they get up to in that. It's just a one-shot book. But books like that, in which kids had adventures, Fool's Master was one of those. It was me trying to do my thing because we used to climb down the storm sewers in Don Mills
Of course you
and
did.
crawl. Yeah, because yeah, because although it was stupid and dangerous and all that stuff, people didn't get as annoyed as they got is if you waited till after dark and climbed up on their roofs of their houses. They tend to think that those were theirs and you shouldn't be there. Storm sewer, they didn't have quite so much a proprietary ownership of. Anyway, yeah, but I that was one of the first novels. I wrote tons of short stories, and they got published in all sorts of weird places, like the Boys' Own Paper, which is the sorry, not the Canadian, I think it was called Canadian Boy, the Canadian version of the Scouting magazine. Um, all sorts of things. And my father used to take little scraps that I'd written, which were usually James Bond pastiches or something like that. I because I thought he would enjoy those, and he would just shove them into his briefcase and take them off to work at Canadian Arsenals or CGE or whatever, and pass them around to other pipe smoking middle-aged comb over guys with horn glasses who would go, "Oh, it's pretty good. Hey, Bob, have him write a sex scene next." And my father would say, "He's 5."
You could have done it.
Yeah, I could have done it because I had all these books to copy from. And then I could just, what I'd seen by eavesdropping on family members, older family members, I hasten to add, uh, and all the stuff about growing up in Don Mills in the 60s.
Hmm.
I can tell you all sorts of scatological stories, but I will share only one with the names filed off to protect the guilty. Um, there was a judge who lived in Don Mills who owned a 1912 white Duesenberg. Running boards, rumble seat, lake pipes along the side, the full roadster. On a hot summer evening, us teenage boys are walking up Banbury discussing the first Amber novel by Selazny. And where, is a real family fantasy soap opera. Where is it going to go from this? And it's a hot summer night, and ghosting down Banbury is the justice with his wife, spread eagled nude and tied to the hood of his car, her ankles to the headlights, her wrists to the windshield wiper arms. And she says, as a good Don Mills matron would, "Good evening, boys. How are we doing?" Because what else is she going to say? And I felt so sorry for her because I was looking at her face and thinking, she's getting bugs all over her face as he drives, and she can't wipe them off because her wrists are tied. And I said, "Oh, we're doing fine. And you?"
That's
And she
great.
says, she says, "Oh, tolerably well, passing well." And then the judge, who's shown off in front of us for a bit, puts the car back into gear and goes off down Banbury, presumably to take her to an assignation somewhere in the parks. But you
That's
see, it
great.
was a different time. It was the 60s. So yeah, I could have written the sex scenes by drawing on what I saw and heard all around me, but that wasn't the point. I was just telling stories at the time. And that sort of scene wouldn't have fit in that sort of story. I always write by following the characters.
Hmm.
Well, okay, unless I'm given an assignment, you have to write this by tonight or to this word count. It has to go with this piece of art, and it concerns these established characters that we've made up. But that would be an exception. But otherwise, I'm letting the characters. Now, most major New York publishers want an outline, and usually I cheat. I just write the whole book, and then I précis it into an outline. There you go.
Yeah.
You know, and it's amazing how well I can see a novel in my outline that turns into the completed book because
Oh, imagine how that happens. I can't
yeah,
imagine that at all.
but yeah, um,
Didn't you
they
write
all
One-Eyed King in a weekend?
well, I did, yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Uh, that was hardly a novel. Look how short the damn thing is. Um,
It is a bit small, but I mean both of ours were a bit small for that well, quote unquote a bit small for
a
that
bit
project.
a bit small. It's a James Bond's problem. Oh, it's a bit small. No, no. That tanned athletic 1.5 inches is big enough for the job. No. But no, a story should be as long as the story needs to be for the story. But then there are occasions where you have to write by a different process. A collaboration, for instance, every collaboration I do is different because I'm so bored with, uh, I'm not. I always say to the other person, "How do you want to do it? Good, we'll do it that way." But if you're writing on your own, I would let the characters run away with the story.
So speaking of your characters, let's talk about Elminster for a second. So where did he come from? Obviously he's you, but but where did he come from? What was
Um,
can you remember your first Elminster memory? And do you remember writing anything first before the novel with him in it?
oh yeah, he was in some of the early Mert short stories.
Hmm.
He was the Gandalf figure, the Merlin figure. Merlin came first, of course. Um, but he was a bit more like Belgarath from the
Yeah, Belgarian.
yeah, because he's a bit more of a rogue um in character and outlook and just being an old storyteller and an asshole.
But
Uh
Belgarath is too busy stooping wood nymphs to do anything useful.
well, damn it. I why do you think I come into my workplace with candy? No, where did I learn it from? Oh, there it is in the book. He
It's
always
true.
had candy to give to anyway. Um but no, I needed a sour-tongued, crusty, cynical old narrator who was so powerful that he didn't have to fear for his own personal safety. So he could literally ignore threats and say things like, "Oh, is that the best you can do? Really? Oh dear." So he was that. And he would say all the rude things that real Eddie, would never dare say, but I wanted to. Like, "Oh, that's a beautiful dress on someone 4 sizes smaller." That sort of stuff. Um, uh, that I would never say in real life, never dare say. But he didn't care because he's so old and he's seen it all, and he just does not care. Um, I just needed, on occasion, an old storyteller narrator, and of course, when the realms became an official setting, he became the unreliable narrator, which gives the dungeon master elbow room to change anything at the gaming table because, well, Elminster lied to you. And later we needed an even more outrageous, unreliable narrator, which is where Volo came from.
Hmm.
Volo is named after Volo, as in the community and the bog, which are real places that you'll encounter um, in Illinois. Um, and I expanded him into Volothamp Gedarm and wrote a whole thing for him. And now I get to meet him in computer games and so on. And I go, yeah, that's Volo, all right. Anyway,
So what would you say is your favorite thing that you've ever written?
that's hard. I don't really have favorites. It's
Oh,
like,
yeah, get out of here, Ed. We all have favorites. We all
no,
have
no, no.
we all have favorite children. I don't want to hear that. We you
Yeah,
liar.
I was just going to say that. Pick my favorite kid. Yeah. No, no, no. The reason I answer it that way is, uh, your definition of favorite changes
Hmm.
from context and over time. And your early stuff, you may look back with this golden nostalgia. Oh, I wish I was 7 again. Ice cream tasted so much nicer when I was 7, sort of thing. But at the same time, you go, "Holy crap, was I a bad writer?" Or whatever, There, so you have the countervailing the golden nostalgia and the purity. You hadn't explored the world yet, so these are your first steps in exploring the world of the blank page that you're going to put chicken scratches all over, um, versus, oh, I could do that so much better now. And yeah, but would it be better? Because what has happened is I've been beaten down by the marketplace. I would write picaresque novels. I'd say, "Know, O prince, that in the years before Atlantis sank beneath the blah blah blah," and then I'd say, "Oh, footnote, aside, 3 pages of aside. Ah, which reminds me, footnote, aside." I'd be doing picaresque novels all over the place, whereas now I've learned to write it in half a sentence because Hollywood wants it in half a sentence, and don't tell me when you can show me. So I now value things like when, for instance, if you watch the television show NCIS, the early NCIS, when Leroy Jethro Gibbs is head of the team, he doesn't talk much. And the actor, Mark Harmon, who played him, would reject scripts by saying, "No, my character's talking too much. Nope, my character doesn't talk like that." And that was the thing. I was learning to pare down and tell more simply, directly, and more effectively. But that's for that marketplace's needs.
Hmm.
Is it better storytelling? Yes, it is. Is it storytelling I want to have as opposed to picaresque, internally going sideways? And so I back into the action scene bum first, backing sideways, talking in another direction. I love that. I want to go on doing that. So that's why it's really hard for me to pick a favorite. I tend to say that one worked better than others, even though it may have been a dead end. Um, and I tend to hate the ones like Elminster Making of a Mage was shotgunned together. That was a 16-day novel. Um, Spellfire, the one that is still sold the best, were up, I think, 12, 13 million copies sold worldwide.
That's all.
It's a travesty because it was originally 3 books, which they chopped, stitched like Frankenstein, then gave me a an opportunity 2 decades later to rewrite an author's version that will be longer and restored. So I did that, and then they shortened it to even shorter than the original in house. Somebody else rewriting all my sentences by taking words out of the middle of the sentence.
So
So
annoying.
they were Hemingway rather than descriptive. So you see, I look back on things and I look upon them colored by the process. Was that fun to write? Was that a pain in the ass to write? Am I still angry about that process or was it good? And some of the times I equate good with at least the editor didn't tromp all over that. At least my words still survive So which is a very long-winded way of saying, yeah, I don't. One of my favorites is a short story called The King's Very Long Day, which is just a short story where the main character, the king, discovers he's being betrayed by everybody, including his queen, and he ends up having to flee the kingdom with the only person who's still loyal, the jester. And they're leaving wounded in the middle of the night through this long gauntlet of stuff they've had to face. And it's not a very long story, and I think it's told fairly well, and it makes some points, and you get to see that the king, despite all this, could keep his sense of humor when his world was literally trying to stab him from all sides. And I think it worked pretty well. So it's stuff like that that I think are favorites. When you go, yeah, that's good writing. It doesn't matter whose name is on it or where someone discovers it in years to come. If they pick it up in a doctor's waiting room and it has no cover on it and it's just a few sheets of paper stapled together and they read it, they'll get to the end of it and say, that was nice. I think I'll take it home with me. You know,
I used to do that too in the
yeah,
doctor's offices.
yeah, yeah. You see, this is the real stuff, folks. This
Yeah.
is where you hear about what life is really like. What did you steal from the doctor's office? And I was privileged in that my father was a bit of a hoarder, not about everything, but about books and magazines. He never threw out any magazines. So I had National Geographics that were reporting on the Second World War in the Pacific
Wow.
by the month as it was happening. And I
Wow.
had Popular Science and Popular Mechanics and Mechanics Illustrated magazines from when they started publishing. So I can tell you that every 3.5 years, regular as clockwork. We got a cover story about flying cars. You will you will take off from your driveway and fly to work, so your commute will be faster and easier. And we will only work 4 hours a week. Those were the
4 hours a
stories.
week. My God.
Anyway,
That's a real fantasy. And
yeah, yeah, true. But those were the recurring stories in the magazines of the day. And I could read them in yellowing, falling apart magazines. Um, and I could read all the wartime stuff just the way it felt. You know, blackout curtains, um, scrap metal drives, loose lips sink ships, all that stuff. And you got the feeling. And of course, I happen to have lots of relatives who'd lived through the war, two world wars and a depression on a farm, and could tell you stories about, men in suits coming to the gate saying, "Is there any work? Is there anything I can do? Just in return, can I sleep in your barn? Could you give me an apple to eat?" And and it gave you a much, because at the same time as I was hearing the stories, I was living in new money, Don Mills. The Toronto Maple Leafs were all my neighbors at the time.
Mhm.
They lived around me. It, I had people living down the street from me who had 6, 8, 9 cars and a garage that would take them all.
Wow.
Yeah. When I went to visit my friend Tim Turner, if it was the right time of the year, his father, Dr. Turner, would be putting his 1912 Packard to bed for the winter, and he would come in and interrupt us and say, "I need you boys just for a minute," because he needed us to get into it. He'd taken the tires off the Packard, but if you didn't take the fenders, so think of an old flivver with the fuselage of the car and these big curving fenders, if you left them on in the winter, the cold air condensed between fender and body and rusted them out. So you unbolted the fenders and took them off and put them in the rafters every year. And to do that, you needed a young kid to get in where the tire had been, all hunched over like a hoop, and hold the fender up with our backs while he unbolted them. There were all these little, and I remember one guy ripping out his pool because he had a walkout pool in the ground, from his back deck, and it was too small. It was about 200 feet long, but he had a daughter who wanted to train for the Olympics, and he's saying, "No, it's got to be twice that length. I want her to be able to do her butterfly sprints twice as long as all the other girls. So they will be doing this, and she'll go, 'That's nothing,' and just burn past them." So he deliberately had the swimming pool doubled in length just for that. He just called in one of his own company's bulldozers and had it done, and it was like, wow, that's money. There was there
Yeah.
was a there there
We've
was
money that we've never seen.
Yes, exactly. There was a rickety bridge north of us. It had been the IBM Country Club, and three houses in the end, they had to drive their cars over this rickety bridge. So, they were all wealthy people, and they complained to the city of North York, who said, "Yeah, we've put it on the list. You know how many bridges we have to redo?" And one of the guys said, "Screw that. I just got a new car for the wife." So he just came and had the bridge demolished and a new one put in at his own expense. He didn't tell anyone.
That's a thing that just happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he was at the end of Banbury. Nobody else's business, as far as he was concerned. So he did it.
I
But he had
with
the money to put in a bridge, which probably cost him about $1.5 million even back then. Yeah, he just did it. Well, I don't want the wife to drive over bumps. It's like, okay.
That's the
But
real fantasy.
yeah, but I mean that versus depression,
Yes.
and versus depression where Eddie don't throw anything away. And I had Aunt Claire would literally say she knew she was joking, but she was driving it home. Eddie, Eddie, we don't throw away food.
Hmm.
You eat your entire, I don't care if you don't like the crust, you eat the entire sandwich, because if you don't, Mr. Hitler will win the war.
He's the real boogeyman. I love
Oh,
that.
shit. And you'd go, that he's dead. It's over. and she'd look at you, and her lips would go like this little line, and she'd say, "And it's thinking like that that
Uh-huh.
will put us in the next one. If you don't do that, or if you do that, whatever it is you're doing wrong, Mr. Hitler will win the war."
She's
It
so
was just
polite to him.
wow.
That's brutal. But what did happen though to that house, and what did happen to your father's book collection?
Well, my father's book collection has been largely picked over. The house is still there. My stepmommy is living in it. It's still a quiet little house um, on a crescent in Don Mills. It's the corner house. It was the show house, so it's on a double lot, which meant that the wires were scotch taped together behind the walls because they built the house in a week to
Oh
have it
my
open as the
God.
show. And my father had to redo them all. But the worst house on the crescent, there were two houses on the wedge-shaped corner lots, and they were the Scandinavian design where the same roof was half house and half carport with
Mhm.
gravel. Well, the Campbells lived in that for years. Um, the property was bought, it was torn down, a new mansion was put up, and it's listed right now for 9,360,000 right now on a realtor's site. Yeah, exactly. Our house was the most expensive house on the Crescent because it was the show house, and um, my grandfather paid $25,000 down
Of course,
to
of
buy
course.
the whole thing. Just and by the way, the other way of doing it, which I hadn't seen until I moved out here to the country, where farmers now do it, or still did it when they went into car dealerships. You just reach into your back pocket, pull out the wad of bills, and you start. It's cash. The $25,000 was cash,
Hmm. Of course.
bills peeled off, and
It was where real estate was different in them days.
yeah, and
That's
I
again, that's the real
yeah,
fantasy.
and I've watched old farmers who smell from the barn. They got manure and straw all over them. They're dressed from the barn, and they go into the car dealership where I'm sitting in the corner waiting for my minivan to be serviced. You know, I'm just sitting waiting, and they walk in, and it's a blast from the 1950s. A salesman with a tartan suit that was never from Scotland. It came out of somebody's um, I think it came out of somebody's window dressing drapes, comes out and says, "So, how's it today? How about them Leafs, eh? Or how about that weather, eh? Or how about those Jays?" You know, and farmer says, "Yeah, mm-hmm. So, yeah, you're thinking of some wheels. Yeah, I'd like a car with them too." And he goes, "Okay, what were you looking for?" "Well, I was thinking something for the little woman." "Oh, the little woman. Yes, let's come out." And off they troop. And they look at a car.
So funny.
And then they come back in. He goes, "Yeah, and I was thinking of got a young un going off to college soon. What do you got that's a fairly safe box, big crumple zone?" Well, they don't have any big crumple zone cars anymore. But the salesman thinks, "What can I sell this guy? Because it's got to be fairly short and small, or there will be crumples." But okay, so and off they go again. And then they come back. He says, "So," and he goes, "Yeah, I think it's time for. I need a new truck. Nothing big, just an open pickup to run around." Off they go again. He comes back and he says, "So, yeah, we spent a pleasant morning. Will you drop in again and think of us?" He goes, "No, I need you and the other guy sitting over there drinking coffee, the other salesman, because I can't drive all three of them home. I can only drive the one. So I need you to get plates for all of them." And he reaches into his back pocket and there's this filthy wad of bills. And he goes, "How much?" And starts peeling them off. That's the old style. They're not dickering. They're never financing. You don't show up until you can pay for the thing cash down.
Yep.
That's the old way. And
There's
it is,
there's no such thing as credit in them days.
yeah. And all of that goes into my stories. All those people, plus all the patrons who come through the door of the public libraries I work, though of my characters. Anyway, I'm sure we've gotten a ways away from what you were asking because
No,
that's
that's
what you
perfect.
do.
That doesn't
You
matter.
meander sideways, bum first.
But exactly, but that's what you like is a good yarn, and so do I. So speaking of which, tell us what you're doing now, Ed. Show us off the new things that
Oh,
people can get.
okay. So here we go.
If the Zoom will ooh. So for those who cannot see, it's called Souls for the Taking.
So this is a um, available in print on demand and as a PDF from DM's Guild 2 days from now. I don't know when this is going to air. I mean, 2 days from when we're talking. Um, and it is a novella written by me and Reese York. And who is Reese York? Well, he was the art director for Blue's Clues and The Expanse and Star Trek Brave New Worlds.
Nice.
Okay. He and I wrote a novella, 20K words, set in the realms. And then the last half of the book is all the game lore stuff for
Ooh.
everything that is in the story. Characters, there's even a
Ooh,
floor
some nice
plan.
art in there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. This is so that's one thing. I also have a cast of Realms fans that include some former company executives, tons and tons of published authors and artists who are formed a collective called Realms Bound. And they're going to do 4 books a year, regional source books. The Dales or the Dale Lands will be the
Mm-hmm.
first one. And it starts with a regional guide. And then the second book is Insights, as in inns, all detailed.
Ah, the
Uh,
pun, Ed.
yeah, I know. I didn't do this. This was them. And then the third one is a Delves book, which is dungeons.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth one is an adventures book. And then they will go all around the realms. They'll vote on which region. They'll probably wait till Gen Con this year, which is, August, sorry, July into August
Mm-hmm.
weekend, to announce what the next region is. And hopefully that will cover a lot of the realms. And I'm working on like about 5 million other projects, including, of course, Othcleoth or Othni.
Hey.
Yeah,
For
whatever you want
those
to
who
call
don't
it.
know, Ed and I did a book together, but we also did
Ah,
other books that were.
yes.
So this is one of the first ones that we did together called Creatures of Fairy Tale and Myth. Also beautiful art. And this is in the Aclea setting, or Aclea if you're Irish. And this, I mean, there's a game book, but this one specifically is a storybook. It's all about the different creatures that color Celtic and Viking mythology for all across different, I guess, time spheres and things like that. And then Ed did The One-Eyed King, which is
Yes.
which is about one of the kings of Dublin. And I did the middle book, and they meet that specific king that who was a real person, and
Yes.
that Citric Silkbeard, and they even though Mindel's meeting with Citric is very very short, but Ed's book is all about Dublin in and around 800s, 900s. So if you haven't read that, do read it now. It's a short book. Wrote it in 5 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, and then Michelle and I edited each other's books in a couple
That's
of
right.
hours. You
Like,
know,
well, edited. We looked it over, and I went, "This is great."
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Me too.
or I looked it over and went, "That's the lady's name." Oh, okay. And then that's it. That was pretty much the only comments, but that was great. Oh, we had a great time, and then Ed is also still doing Athcliath stuff, doing maps and adventures, which you can find on Patreon. You also have your own Patreon, Ed, I think, right? Because
Yep.
you're also producing video Realms lore videos that are
Hmm.
on YouTube, and you do quite a lot of them, a couple times a week actually, and
Yep.
they're quite short, but they're very nicely produced. So, if you had not been to the Edverse, I recommend you go there. You go there now. Ed, is there anything that you would like to tell everybody before we say goodbye?
Ah, geez. Um, Let me just say, if you're a writer, if you want to write a book, do it. You could be killed by a car tomorrow. There may be no tomorrow. Do it now. Put the stuff out there because then you'll have done it. You'll have left your mark on the world. The world is full of masterful guitarists, clarinetists, lutists who don't know because they've never picked the instrument up. They'll get around to it someday. There is no someday. There's just the nearest Sunday. Do it before the nearest Sunday, not someday. So that's what I'd like to say. Now, if you're into D&D, Greyhawk is coming back, and I go on Lord Gasumba's J. Scott's thing, and I do theme things of the realms and Greyhawk, and I'll be doing that this Sunday, someday.
I was going to say, I was going to parrot your aunt's words and say, if you don't do it, Mr. Hitler will win the war.
War, yes, yes, that's it. There is no tomorrow, or we don't know for sure if there's a tomorrow for us. So do it now, and don't wait. And oh, it'll be better if I just like leave it for a bit. When I get to it, it'll be better. No, it will not be done. Do
Yeah,
it.
don't wait for a publisher to be interested in it. Don't wait for any of those things because those
Yeah.
things are vastly and quickly disappearing. So if you want to do it, as Ed says, do it now. Do it live. Do it now.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Writers are people who write. They are not people who find jackets with leather patches on the elbows, attend parties with wine and cheese, and talk about the novels they're going to write.
I mean, you could do
Those,
that too. I like a cheese. That's
I like a
good.
cheese too, and I like wine too, but that's an author. That's when you're playing at being an author. It's much better to be a writer and actually write. It's the difference between knowing how to drive your car and having very expensive cars parked on your front lawn that you don't know how to start and move.